The wind carried the sound of wolves howling not as beasts, but as men broken by fate. And in the center of the forest, barefoot, trembling and unafraid, stood Lady Erwin Vale, the daughter of the House of Winterthorn. Her gown was torn, blood stained the hem where thorns had caught her, yet her face held no fear, only the kind of calm that comes when love and death share the same breath. Before her lay the creature she had once dreamed of only as a myth, a wolf of silver and shadow bleeding out upon the stones of the sacred clearing. His eyes, the color of stormlight, met hers. He was not supposed to exist, nor was she supposed to find him, but love in ancient times was rarely kind. It bloomed in forbidden places, and it demanded more than it gave. The wolf's breathing faltered. He shifted, not fully man, not fully beast, until what lay before her was both, and neither. A prince cursed for the sins of his ancestors. Kyle Thornabane, the last heir of the forsaken bloodline, the one her people called the Moon's Bane. "Do not touch me," he rasped, his voice hoarse with pain and power. "My curse will follow your soul." Erwin knelt anyway. "Then let it. My soul was never my own to keep." Her hands glowed faintly, warmth against the cold. The ancient runes on her wrist burned through the blood as she whispered the old words of binding, ones only a daughter of Vale could know. The forest went still. The stars trembled, and when her light faded, the wolf's wounds were gone, and she was gone with them. Only her ribbon remained, caught in his claws, fluttering like breath against the dark. 3 nights later, under a different moon, the earth itself groaned. Kyle Thornabane rose from his grave beneath the frost, not as a man, not as a beast, but as something in between, the Alpha reborn, bound by her last breath, condemned to finish what her love had begun. He opened his eyes, and the world tasted of her. Salt, lilac, and loss. "Erwin," he whispered to the wind, "you gave me life. Now I will give you forever." And the forest answered. Chapter 1. The Return of the Wolf King. The year was long forgotten, for in this kingdom time bowed to memory. The village of Thornmere slept under snow, its roofs heavy with the silence of a people who feared their own shadows. Fires burned low. Bells tolled from the monastery beyond the hills, their echoes swallowed by the forest that once devoured gods. At the edge of the village, a woman hung herbs to dry from her porch. Marith, the widow of the gatekeeper, whose voice always carried warnings no one wished to hear. "They say he walks again," she murmured to her neighbor, her voice like dry leaves. "The wolf who rose for love." Her neighbor, young Seren Doran, laughed softly, though her fingers trembled as she twisted a sprig of lavender. "Old stories, Marith. Ghosts don't walk." "Love does," Marith said, eyes narrowing, "and it walks where it was wronged," the forest beyond them sighed. The wolves howled again, nearer this time, and Seren crossed herself, not for the gods, but for the woman the song still mourned, Lady Erwin, the one who died for a wolf. That night, in the ruins of Thorn Hall, Kael sat by the window of what had once been his father's throne room. Snow fell through the broken ceiling, catching on the edge of his black cloak. His reflection in the cracked mirror was not the man he remembered. Eyes pale as winter moons, veins threaded with faint silver light. He had not spoken to anyone since he clawed his way from the grave. But her name still lived in him like fire under frost. Erwin. Every night he heard her voice in the wind. Every dawn he expected her to come walking through the mist. Instead, he woke to emptiness, to the echo of his own vow. "Find her story," the voice in his dreams whispered. "Finish it." And so he waited, until one night he heard it again. A song, soft, haunting, carried by a woman's voice through the snow. He followed it. Down the slope of Thorn Hill, across the frozen river, he came upon a small cottage. Inside, a young woman sat by candlelight, her hair the color of ash, her eyes the same pale grey as Erwin's. Her name was Leora Vale, Erwin's younger sister. She looked up when the door opened, her song dying mid-breath. The candle flickered, and her hand went still above the parchment she'd been writing upon. A letter, half-finished, sealed with the sigil of her house. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You're supposed to be dead." "So was she," Kyle said. The words hung between them like fate rediscovered. The fire snapped. The shadows swayed. "You came back," Leora said, voice trembling. "For her?" He nodded once. "For what she left unfinished." Her eyes softened, though her hand clutched the edge of the table. "Then you should know. She didn't just save your life, she bound you to her curse." He stepped closer. "And if that's true, then neither of you will rest until the bond is fulfilled." Kyle's jaw clenched. "And how do I fulfill it?" She met his gaze with quiet sorrow. "By finding what she died to protect, the heart of the forest, the source of the bloodline's first sin." That night, as Kyle left her cottage, the snow fell heavier. The wind carried her last words through the trees. "When you find it, you'll find her again, but love her carefully, for the forest remembers every promise broken." And far above, the moon wept silver tears across the ruins of Thorn Hall. Chapter 2. The Oath of the Blood Moon. The moon was swollen that night, heavy with secrets, pale as bone. It hung low over the forest, casting its cold blessing upon a world that had forgotten what mercy felt like. Kyle Thornabane walked through snow that whispered his name. Every tree seemed to lean closer, listening. Their bark, silver-veined and scarred, bore the marks of centuries, the prayers of men who once believed that blood could bargain with the gods. He carried no torch. The light of his curse was enough. Beneath his skin, faint threads of silver pulsed whenever he exhaled. The same magic that had once been his prison now hummed quietly, alive, restless. Somewhere beneath that heartbeat of light was her. Erwin's soul tangled with his. The forest had a memory, and it remembered their love too well. At the edge of the vale, where frost gave way to stone, stood the shrine of the Blood Moon, a ruin older than the kingdom itself. Its columns leaned, half consumed by ivy and grief. The altar, carved from obsidian, was cracked down the center like a heart split in two. He stopped there. The night was too quiet. Only the wind moved, soft, deliberate, like fingers brushing against his cloak. He set his hand upon the stone. It burned, and from the darkness a voice rose. "The heart of the forest does not forgive, Thornabane." Kyle's head turned sharply. A figure emerged from the shadow of the shrine, a man in armor dark as ink, its edges lined with silver etchings that caught the moonlight like blades. His face was scarred, his gaze steady. He moved with the discipline of someone who had seen too much of war and faith to believe in either anymore. "Who speaks my name in the house of the gods?" Kyle asked quietly. The man removed his helm, revealing a face both worn and noble. "One who once served them. I am Sir Alaric Dane, keeper of the old oaths." Kyle studied him. "You were one of my father's knights." Alaric nodded. "Before your father forgot what it meant to be a man." "And now?" Kyle asked. "You hunt his son?" Alaric's eyes flickered with something between pity and reverence. "No, Kyle. I guard his sins." The two men faced each other in silence, breath ghosting in the cold air. Alaric's voice softened. "They say you rose because of her." Kyle's jaw tensed. "They say too much. She was a veil," Alaric said. "Born of the blood that bound this land. When she touched you, she did what no priest dared. She crossed the boundary between blessing and curse." Kyle's fingers curled against the altar. "She saved me. She doomed you both," Alaric murmured. "And now the forest demands balance." He drew a small dagger from his belt, its hilt carved with ancient runes. The only way to end the bond is through the blood moon's oath. Kyle's eyes lifted. What oath? To walk the path of redemption, to seek the one who remembers the first sin. And who is that? Kyle asked. Alaric hesitated. The seer of the hollow. They call her Nerissa, keeper of dreams, whisperer of truths men were not meant to hear. Kyle straightened. Then I will find her. Alaric sheathed his blade. You will not return the same. I do not wish to, Kyle said simply. They journeyed together at dawn. The road twisted through valleys and ruins where the air smelled of ash and lilac. The scent she'd left behind. Villages whispered his name as he passed, though none dared step close. They saw the faint light beneath his skin and turned away, crossing themselves with trembling hands. He spoke little, and Alaric less. But one night, as they camped beside a frozen river, the knight said quietly, "Tell me, Kyle, when she gave her life for you, did you love her before or after she died?" Kyle looked at the fire, at the embers curling upward like lost souls. "I loved her," he said, "when she looked at me as if the curse were not a cage but a crown." Alaric studied him. "And now?" "Now," Kyle whispered, "I love her like a prayer I'm afraid to finish." The older man said nothing after that. By the third night, the forest had changed. The trees grew twisted, their roots pulsing faintly with red light, the boundary of the hollow. Mist drifted low across the ground, thick as breath. Even the wolves did not enter. And yet, as Kyle stepped forward, the mist parted for him. From within it, a voice floated, feminine, soft but ageless. "You wear the scent of a woman who defied death." Kyle's pulse stilled. A figure stepped out of the mist, a woman cloaked in white, her eyes blind, her hair braided with silver leaves. Nerissa of the hollow, her lips curved in something like a smile. "And you come seeking her again?" Kyle bowed his head slightly. "I come to end what she began." "Do you know what that means?" she asked. "I do not care." Her blind eyes lifted toward him. "Then you are already hers." The seer's tent was carved into the side of an ancient oak, its roots thick as stone. Inside, candles burned with blue flame, and the air shimmered with whispers, like hundreds of voices speaking in languages long buried. She drew a bowl of water from the spring and placed it before him. "Look." Kyle leaned forward. The surface rippled and then cleared. He saw her, Erwen, standing at the edge of a lake beneath a sky of silver fire. Her dress was torn, her lips parted, as though she were calling his name. He reached toward her reflection. The water burned. "She is neither dead nor alive," Nerissa said. "She lingers between. The bond keeps her tethered, and your heartbeat pulls her closer every night." Kyle's throat tightened. "Then tell me how to bring her back." The seer's voice softened. "Love brought you to ruin once. It will again. I do not fear ruin." "Then kneel," she whispered, "and swear by the blood moon that you will pay its price." He knelt. The air thickened. The candles flared. "I, Kyle Thornabane," he said, his voice steady, "swear upon the blood that binds me to her, to walk the path until her soul is free." The wind screamed through the tent. The flames turned crimson, and the seer smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "So it is written," she murmured. "The wolf and the maiden will meet again, when blood remembers love, and love remembers death." The light faded. Kyle lifted his gaze. "What happens now?" Nerissa turned away. "Now, Alpha-King, you walk into your own past." Outside, the first snow of the blood moon began to fall. Flakes tinged faintly red, as though the heavens themselves were bleeding. Kyle looked toward the forest, and for a moment he saw her again. Erwen, standing in the distance, her hand reaching for his. And then she was gone. But her whisper lingered. "Find me before the forest does." Chapter 3. The House of Winterthorn. The journey north took 6 days and 7 nights. The cold grew sharper with each mile, as though the air itself wanted to cut away what warmth still lived in him. By the time Kyle saw the towers of Winterthorn rising through the fog, his horse's breath came out like smoke from an ancient forge. He had heard tales of the Vale estate, whispered even among his own cursed kin, but nothing had prepared him for the sight. Winterthorn was less a castle than a cathedral to sorrow. Its walls, white as bone, stood carved with runes that pulsed faintly under the light of the blood moon. The windows were narrow and arched, like eyes that had forgotten how to close. Snow drifted against the high gates, where the family crest still gleamed, a thorn wrapped around a moon. Kyle dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the frost. Every step echoed like a heartbeat in the silence. He remembered Eowyn's voice then, soft as rain. No one leaves Winterthorn untouched. The house remembers everything. At the gate, a woman awaited him. She was dressed in mourning black, her face pale as the snow that fell around her. Her hair, once golden, had dulled with grief. Her eyes, sharp, discerning, tired, studied him as though she were measuring a prophecy against the man who stood before her. "I thought the rumors were lies," she said at last, "but there is no mistaking those eyes." Kyle bowed slightly. "And you are Lady Selene Vale," she said, voice low and measured. "Eowyn's mother." He had not expected her to open the gate. He had not expected her to speak his name without hatred. But her gaze was not cruel, only hollow, like a candle that had burned too long. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "This house has no forgiveness left to give." "I did not come for forgiveness," Kyle said. "I came for truth." The great doors creaked open. The halls of Winterthorn were carved with frescoes of angels and wolves entwined in endless war. The chandeliers were wrought of black iron and hung low, candles burning like trembling souls. The air smelled faintly of incense and something older, rosewater perhaps, and grief. Lady Selene led him to the great hall, where the hearth burned with silver flame. There, a man sat upon a long wooden chair carved with the sigil of the Vale lineage. He looked older than memory, hair white as snow, eyes sharp and cold. Lord Aaron Vale. Kyle recognized him from the old stories, the man who had sealed the first pact with the gods of the forest, the one who had cursed his own blood to keep their land alive. "So," the Lord said, his voice echoing like stone breaking, "the wolf returns." Kyle bowed his head slightly. "I came to honor her." "Honor?" Aaron's voice hardened. "You took her. I never took what wasn't freely given." The room fell silent. The firelight flickered between them like a restless soul. Selene's eyes darted between the two men, father and curse, faith and defiance. "Enough," she said softly. "He deserves to know." Aaron turned sharply toward her. "Know what?" "The truth," Selene whispered, "about the day she died." Kyle looked up. "You know what happened?" Selene's gaze lowered. "I was there when she left. She told me she had seen you in her dreams, bleeding beneath the old shrine. I begged her not to go, but she said the forest had chosen." Aaron's jaw clenched. "She disobeyed her vow. She followed her heart," Selene said. "Is that not what we all pray for when the gods stop listening?" Kyle's breath hitched. "She saved me," Selene's voice softened. "And in doing so, she bound you both." A long silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the silver fire. Finally, Lord Aaron spoke. "There is a relic," he said. "The heart of Winterthorn. A crystal of blood and ice born from the first sacrifice. Every Vale heir is bound to it from birth. When your lover gave her life for yours, her soul entered that heart." Kyle's eyes darkened. "Then tell me where it lies." "You will not survive it," Aaron said. "The heart feeds on love. It will strip you bare until you forget who you were." Kyle's voice was steady. "Then I will remember her instead." That night they gave him a chamber overlooking the frozen gardens. He could see the moon reflected in the black water of the lake below, where the statues of forgotten ancestors stood half buried in frost. He could not sleep. Every corner of the room breathed her name. The curtains, the cold sheets, the faint scent of lilac in the air. He rose before dawn and wandered the halls. It was then he saw her, standing in the gallery, her ghost framed by stained glass and snowlight. Eowyn. Her form was faint, more memory than flesh, but her eyes, those eyes, were alive. He took a step forward. Eowyn. Her lips trembled. "You shouldn't have come here. You said that before, and you never listened," she said, with a faint, aching smile. He moved closer, and though his hand passed through her, he swore he felt warmth linger in the air. "Tell me where your heart is," he whispered. Her gaze flickered toward the frozen lake below. Beneath the garden, under the statue of the first queen. Then, softer, almost a plea. "Chaol, if you love me, do not wake what sleeps there." "I have already woken," he said, "and I will not sleep again until you do." Her form began to fade, light dissolving into the cold. "Then you will destroy us both," she whispered, and she was gone. Morning broke with the sound of bells. Snow fell over the house of Winterthorn, heavy and white. Chaol stood at the edge of the lake, staring down at the frozen surface that hid her heart. Behind him a voice spoke. "You mean to open it?" said Alaric, his tone grim. Chaol nodded. "She showed me where—" The knight stepped beside him. "And if she was trying to warn you?" Chaol's eyes softened. "Then I'll learn what she feared." That night, as the moon rose red and full, Chaol knelt beside the lake with his hands pressed against the ice. The air pulsed with ancient power. He whispered her name. Once, twice, and on the third the ice began to bleed. Chapter 4. The Heart Beneath the Lake. The night had no stars, only a single red moon that hung low and swollen, its reflection rippling across the frozen lake like a wound that would not close. Chaol stood alone on the shore, his cloak billowing in the wind, the silver threads of his armor catching the faint light. Behind him, the manor loomed like a sleeping beast, windows shuttered, the air thick with the scent of winter roses and fear. The wind whispered her name again. Eowyn. It was the same sound that had haunted his dreams every night since she died saving him. He dropped to one knee, pressing a palm to the ice. It was colder than death itself. Beneath it, he could sense it. A pulse, faint and rhythmic. A heart, still beating beneath layers of centuries and frost. "The heart of Winterthorn," he murmured, "and the soul of the woman I loved." He drew his dagger, its blade engraved with the sigil of his clan, a wolf devouring its own shadow. As he pressed the edge against the ice, the runes carved into the steel began to glow. The surface trembled. Then, with a low, shuddering crack, the ice began to bleed. From the shadows of the garden someone spoke. "If you break that seal, you break the world that holds her." Chaol turned sharply. Lady Selene stood there, her hair loose, her nightgown trailing in the snow like spilled moonlight. In her hand was a candle, its flame fluttering madly in the wind. "Do not make me your enemy, my lord," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You are not the first man to try to bring back what the gods have taken." Chaol's eyes glowed faintly silver, wolf and man warring beneath his skin. "I do not want to defy the gods." Selene stepped closer, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Then what do you want?" His voice cracked. "I want to finish her story." She stared at him for a long time, searching his face for something. Remorse, madness, faith. What she saw instead was devotion so fierce it frightened her. "You loved her that much?" she whispered. Chaol's hand trembled against the ice. "No," he said. "I love her still." And with that, he drove the blade into the frozen lake. The sound was deafening. A thunderous fracture splitting the silence of centuries. The ice burst open, shards flying like broken glass into the night. Beneath it, black water churned, glowing faintly with the crimson light. Lady Selene fell to her knees, weeping. "Oh, gods, what have you done?" The water began to rise. Slowly, something surfaced, an orb of light, pulsing with a heartbeat that did not belong to the living. It hovered above the water, beating in perfect rhythm with Kyle's own, the heart of Winterthorn. It was beautiful and terrible, a crystal of blood and frost suspended between worlds. Within it he saw her face, faint, fragile and crying. "Erwin." Her voice came from within the crystal, soft and raw, like a whisper through a dream. "You shouldn't have come back, Kyle." He reached out, tears burning his eyes. "You told me where to find you." "No," she said, "I told you where I was buried." The lake trembled beneath them. The moon turned darker, redder. The reflection of Winterthorn's towers wavered, bending as though the house itself was holding its breath. "If you free me," Erwin whispered, "you will take my curse as your own." "Then I'll carry it," Kyle said. "Until the end." "You don't understand," she said, her eyes glistening with sorrow. "The curse isn't death, it's memory. To remember me is to lose yourself." Behind them, Alaric appeared, sword drawn. "Kyle, stop this madness. She's not meant to return." Kyle turned, his expression unreadable. "Then why does her heart still beat?" Alaric hesitated, torn between duty and love for the friend he once knew. "Because love itself was the sacrifice. She gave her heart to the gods to save you. That's why you lived." Kyle's grip tightened. "Then she lives through me, and I will not let her fade." With a single motion he pressed his hand to the crystal. Light exploded across the frozen garden. The ground trembled, trees split, the air filled with the echo of her name shouted by unseen voices. Kyle's body arched, pain ripping through him like fire and ice entwined. He saw flashes, memories that were not his own. Erwin, as a child, chasing fireflies in the garden. Erwin kneeling by the lake, whispering her vows to the moon. Erwin standing at the altar of the gods, knife in hand, eyes full of tears. For him, she had said, let him live, let him love again. And then, darkness. When Kyle awoke, dawn was breaking over Winterthorn. The lake was still, the crystal heart was gone, and in its place stood Erwin, alive, barefoot, her gown wet with frost, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with confusion. She looked at him as though waking from a long dream. "Kyle?" He rose to his knees, staring in disbelief. "You came back." She smiled weakly, then whispered, "Not all of me. Behind them." Lady Selene and Alaric watched from the shore, fear and awe mingling on their faces. The birds had gone silent. Even the air seemed to pause, waiting. Kyle reached out, brushing a trembling hand against her cheek. It was warm. "You're real," he whispered. Erwin's hand covered his. "For now." Her gaze drifted toward the manor. "But something else woke with me." Kyle frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked up at the red sky. "The gods do not return what they've taken," she said softly. "They trade." The lake shuddered again, ripples darkening to black. From beneath the ice, a low growl echoed. Ancient, mournful, alive. Kyle turned, pulling her close. The water churned. Erwin whispered, her voice breaking, "Kyle, whatever happens next, remember. This was my choice." And as the sun rose over Winterthorn, the surface of the lake split open once more, revealing not a reflection, but a pair of golden eyes staring up through the water. Eyes that did not belong to any man. Chapter 5. The Wolf That Watches the Dawn. The dawn was wrong. It came too fast, too red, and too quiet. The light that touched Winterthorn that morning did not feel like sunlight at all. It felt like the blood of the moon had forgotten how to fade. Kyle stood at the lake's edge, his hands still shaking. The world smelled of salt and smoke. Behind him, Erwin sat upon a fallen column, her bare feet in the frost, her eyes distant. The wind tugged at her hair. She didn't seem to feel the cold anymore. Alaric paced several steps away, his sword drawn though there was nothing yet to fight. Lady Selene knelt at the water's edge, whispering prayers that sounded older than her voice. And beneath the lake, the golden eyes still gleamed. Eowyn broke the silence first. "I remember dying," she said quietly. Her tone wasn't fragile, it was factual, like she was recalling a dream that had lingered too long. Kyle turned toward her, his throat dry. "You don't have to. I want to." She lifted her gaze to him. "Because it wasn't pain that I remember, it was you calling my name, and the gods asking me what I was willing to lose to make you stop." Her words struck him harder than any blade ever had. "I thought I was strong enough to bear it," she continued, "to give my heart and stay gone. But you pulled me back, and now—" She looked at the lake. The golden eyes blinked once. "Now it follows me." The wind changed, colder, heavier. From the tree line, the crows burst into flight, scattering like black ink spilled across the sky. The surface of the lake began to ripple. Then came the first sound, a low growl that rose like thunder from beneath the earth. Alaric moved instinctively in front of them. "Back! Whatever it is, it's not meant for the living." The ice split again, a jagged line running through its center. From it, mist poured, dark, thick, and alive. It coiled upward until it took shape, the outline of a massive wolf, its body made of shadow and snow. Its fur glowed faintly with silver veins, and its eyes, those same molten gold eyes, locked on Eowyn. Kyle's every instinct went silent. Eowyn stepped forward. "Stop," Kyle said, grabbing her wrist. Her skin was warm now, too warm. "You don't know what it is." Her voice was soft. "I do." He shook his head. "Then tell me." "It's what came in my place," she whispered. "The gods don't take souls without leaving guardians. When I returned, so did it. A fragment of what I was before." Kyle's heart clenched. "Before?" She turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. "Before I was Eowyn Vale, I was part of the forest, a daughter of the moon's first vow, the one who promised to keep balance between man and beast." Alaric stepped closer. "You mean—" "Yes." Her voice trembled for the first time. "The wolf is me." The creature let out a deep, echoing snarl. Frost shattered at its feet. Its eyes softened when it looked at her, but when they shifted to Kyle, the air changed. Kyle could feel it, a territorial pulse, primal and ancient. The wolf didn't hate him. It simply knew that he didn't belong to her world. The tension burned between them. Something unspoken, animal, intimate. It was love's shadow. Kyle stepped forward anyway, defiance in every breath. "If you are her shadow," he said, "then you will listen to her." The wolf's gaze flickered, as if deciding whether the man before it was a threat or a rival. Eowyn reached out, her hand trembling. "Let me touch it," she whispered. Selene screamed, "No, the heart is not whole." But it was too late. Her fingers brushed the wolf's muzzle. A flash of light erupted, blinding white and red. Kyle staggered back, shielding his eyes. When he looked again, both of them, Eowyn and the wolf, had fallen to their knees, glowing with the same flickering energy. Eowyn gasped for air, her skin burning with silver veins that pulsed beneath her skin. "Kyle," she whispered, "it's merging." He rushed to her, catching her before she fell. The wolf dissolved into mist and poured into her chest like smoke returning to fire. Her eyes rolled back. Her pulse quickened, then faltered. Kyle held her tight. "Stay with me, Eowyn." Her eyes opened again, and they weren't blue anymore. They were gold. When she spoke, her voice carried two tones, hers and something older. "I remember everything." Her fingers curled around his wrist with unnatural strength. "The first wolves, the pact, the curse that kept your kind in the dark for centuries. Kyle, you were never meant to survive that night." He shook his head. "You died for me. I died because of you," she said softly, but her touch softened. "And now we are bound by what should have ended. Behind them, the manor bells began to toll, slow, deliberate, as though echoing from the depths of the world. Celine rose to her feet, her face pale. "The old blood has awakened. The gods will not allow this." Kyle pulled Erwen close. "Then let them come." They fled into the woods as the sun rose, though it barely broke through the clouds. The forest was alive with whispers now, roots shifting underfoot, branches curling as though trying to reach them. Erwen leaned on him, her breath shallow. "Kyle," she murmured, "the wolf isn't gone, it's sleeping inside me. Then we'll learn to live with it," he said. She smiled faintly. "No, it's not that simple. The heart that brought me back is tied to Winterthorn. If I leave it too long..." She looked toward the horizon. "The curse spreads." Kyle's hand tightened around hers. "Then I'll find a way to break it." Erwen studied him, the faintest trace of heartbreak in her gaze. "You always say that, and I always mean it." They stopped beneath an old willow by the frozen stream. The sunlight broke through in fragments, dappling her face with warmth and shadow. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, silence heavy and sacred. "Tell me something," she said. "When you thought I was gone, what did you remember most?" Kyle hesitated, his throat tight. "The sound of your laughter. It was the only thing that didn't echo like a prayer I'd lost." Her eyes glistened. "Then remember it again. Whatever happens, remember that sound." And then, quietly, she pressed her lips to his. Not desperate, not feverish, but slow and reverent, like two souls remembering how to be one. But the peace didn't last. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made Kyle's wolf stir. Smoke, iron, blood. From deep in the forest came the sound of horns, low and cruel. The hunters of the divine were coming. Erwen's eyes turned gold again. "They've found us." Kyle drew his blade, the silver runes igniting once more. "Then we stop running." As the horns grew louder and the sky darkened again, Erwen whispered a single word that made the air tremble. "Alpha!" And Kyle's eyes burned silver. The beast within him awoke. Chapter 6. The Hunt of the Gods. They came at dusk. Not as men nor beasts, but as something in between, cloaked in bone-white armor that glimmered like ice beneath the dying light. Their horses were spectral, hooves burning blue against the snow. Their faces were hidden behind masks carved in the shape of wolves. There were 7 of them. The hunters of the eternal veil, the gods' silent executors. The forest stilled at their arrival. The trees bent their branches, the river froze midstream, the air thickened with the scent of ash and divinity. Even the wolves that watched from the ridge lowered their heads. They rode beneath banners woven from moonlight, each bearing the same sigil, a bleeding heart bound in chains. Kyle saw them first from the cliffs above the glen. He and Erwen crouched in the shadows, breath misting in the cold air. "They're not men," Alaric whispered beside them, his hand steady on his sword. "They're echoes, the god's memory made flesh." Erwen's golden eyes reflected the glow below. "They're not here for me," she said. "They're here for him." Kyle turned sharply. "For me?" She nodded slowly. "When I gave my life, the gods marked you as mine. You were never meant to live beyond my sacrifice. By pulling me back, you broke their law." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Then they'll learn that love answers to no law." Erwen's gaze softened, but grief lingered there. "And they'll teach you that everything has a cost." Down below, the lead rider dismounted, tall, broad-shouldered and regal in his silence. He removed his mask. His face was carved with runes of light that pulsed like veins of lightning. His eyes burned with gold and silver intertwined. "Kyle of the bloodline of the first wolf," he called, his voice echoing through the valley. "You walk in defiance of the eternal oath. By the law of the gods, your borrowed breath must end." Kyle rose from the ridge, his cloak whipping behind him in the wind. "Then you'll have to take it." The leader's gaze flickered to Erwen. And you, daughter of the moon's first vow, you should not have returned. You have unbalanced the world that bore you. Erwin's voice trembled, but her chin lifted. Then the world was too fragile to deserve us. Alaric cursed softly under his breath. We're outnumbered. Kyle glanced at him. Not outwilled. He drew his sword. The runes along its edge flared white-hot, and the earth seemed to shudder in answer. Erwin stepped beside him, her hand glowing faintly where the wolf's mark pulsed beneath her skin. Together they looked like two halves of the same defiance, light and shadow, mortal and eternal, love and law. The hunters advanced. Their movements were soundless. Blades glinted like the edges of shattered stars. The moment they crossed the threshold of the clearing, the forest screamed, trees bending, roots cracking, crows exploding into the air. Kyle met the first strike head-on. Steel rang against celestial iron. The impact sent a shockwave through the snow, carving a crater beneath them. Kyle's body burned, his pulse sinking with something ancient. His wolf roared inside him, begging to be unleashed. "Kyle!" Erwin called, her voice both command and plea. "I'm here," he growled, eyes flashing silver. "Always." The battle blurred into chaos. Alaric moved like a phantom, cutting through divine flesh that bled light. Selene stood at the ridge, chanting old words in a tongue forbidden since the First Age, her voice summoning shadows to cloak them. And Erwin moved as though the air obeyed her. With every step, frost bloomed, with every touch, light bent. Her hands glowed with the pale fire of resurrection, each motion both grace and destruction. Yet for every hunter they struck down, two more emerged from the mist. Kyle's strength faltered. The silver runes along his blade began to dim. Erwin saw it, and made a choice. She stepped into his path, catching the next blow meant for him. The sword of the lead hunter cut across her side, spilling silver light instead of blood. Kyle caught her before she fell. "No, no, not again!" Her eyes fluttered open. "You forget," she whispered, voice breaking into a soft smile. "I'm harder to kill now." She reached up, touching his cheek with trembling fingers. "Let me try something." Before he could stop her, she turned toward the hunters and raised her hand. The mark of the wolf upon her chest blazed to life. Light poured out of her, not warm, but ancient. The hunters froze mid-strike, their masks cracking under the force of it. Then came her voice, calm, commanding, divine. "By the vow of the moon, I command you, stand down." For the first time the gods hesitated. The lead hunter lowered his blade, his expression unreadable. "You claim the vow?" Erwin's hair whipped in the wind, eyes glowing gold. "I reclaim it." Silence stretched. Then he spoke again, softer, almost reverent. "Then bear its burden. The Alpha-King rises through you." He turned to Kyle, lowering his mask once more. "The gods will not return. They will observe. From this night forth your bond is the balance between our realms. Should your love falter, the curse awakens anew." Kyle's grip on Erwin's hand tightened, then let it sleep forever. The hunters bowed once, and vanished, dissolving into mist. The forest exhaled. The snow began to fall again. For the first time in centuries, the air smelled of peace. Kyle turned to Erwin. "It's over," he whispered, but her face told him otherwise. Her eyes dimmed, the gold fading back to blue. "No," she said softly. "It's only changed." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then whatever it becomes, we face it together." She leaned into him, exhaustion trembling through her frame. "You don't understand, Kyle. To reclaim the vow, something had to be offered in return." His chest tightened. "Erwin, what did you do?" Her lips trembled. "The gods wanted an anchor." "An anchor?" She smiled weakly. "You—" The words hung between them like a blade suspended mid-air. Kyle's breath caught. "No." Erwin's tears glimmered like frost. I gave them your soul to keep the balance. As long as you live, the realms stay still. But if you fall, everything falls. Kyle voice broke. You traded one curse for another. Her hand cupped his cheek. I traded chaos for you. And when she kissed him, the sky finally broke open. Snow falling soft and endless as the dawn bled pale gold across Winterthorn's frozen woods. Chapter 7. The Burden of the Alpha-King. The first light of dawn bled across the snow in pale ribbons, soft as silk. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed afraid to speak. Kyle stood at the edge of the frozen lake, watching the faint reflection of his breath on the ice. His reflection shimmered, not quite his own. The faint golden runes of the gods still glowed along his throat, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Each pulse felt heavier than the last. Behind him, Erwin approached slowly. Her steps were light, but he felt her presence like warmth brushing against his spine. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. His voice, when it came, was rough. "It's strange. I can hear them sometimes, whispers, as if the world is listening through me." Her hand hesitated, then found his arm. "It is listening. You are its anchor now." He turned to her, those wolf-silver eyes searching hers for something she couldn't name. "And what are you now, Erwin?" She smiled faintly, though sorrow rimmed the edges. "The reason you can't be free." They walked back to the keep in silence. Winterthorn Castle stood beneath the pale sun, its towers crowned with frost. Smoke curled gently from the great hall chimneys, carrying the scent of pine and roasted grain. To any passerby, it might have looked peaceful, but the air within its walls had changed. The servants whispered when Kyle passed, the soldiers bowed lower than before. They called him the chosen king, but Kyle heard another name in their voices, the cursed one. That evening the hall was full of uneasy quiet. Alaric stood near the hearth, his armor half unbuckled, his expression tight. "They're afraid of you," he said bluntly. "Even I don't know what you are anymore." Kyle gave a bitter laugh. "Neither do I." Celine entered from the shadows, her eyes dark as ink. "You carry divine weight, Kyle. You can't pretend it's gone. The god's mark is alive, look." She lifted his hand, tracing the faint shimmer beneath the skin. The light flickered in answer, like a pulse beneath a bruise. Erwin, seated by the window, flinched but said nothing. Celine's gaze darted between them. "What did you give them, Erwin? There's always a price." Erwin's voice trembled like a confession. His soul. The hall fell silent. Alaric's hand dropped from his sword. "You... what?" Kyle turned toward her, voice low but sharp. "Erwin," she met his gaze, eyes wet. "It was the only way to save you, to save us, by damning me." "I didn't damn you," she cried. "I bound you to life. As long as you breathe, the world stands. I couldn't lose you again, Kyle. Not after." Her voice cracked. The words died in the space between them. The fire snapped. The shadows grew long. Kyle's expression softened, pain warring with love in his eyes. "Erwin, you think I wanted to be saved at that cost?" Her voice fell to a whisper. "I couldn't watch you die again." He moved toward her, slow, deliberate, until the air between them shimmered with heat and sorrow. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. "Then we both live with it," he murmured. "Every breath, every night, every dawn, until the gods themselves envy what we endure." Outside, the wind began to rise. Snow swept across the courtyard like restless ghosts. From the northern cliffs, a faint howl echoed, not of wolves, but something older, something listening. Erwin looked up sharply. "Do you hear that?" Kyle did. The whisper within him pulsed stronger now, ancient, commanding, like a heartbeat from beneath the earth. He staggered, clutching his chest. "They're calling—" Alaric stepped forward. "The gods?" Kyle shook his head slowly. No, something beneath them, something else. The torches in the hall flickered blue. The air grew heavy, pressing down on their lungs. And then a voice, neither male nor female, filled the room like the wind itself speaking. The balance wavers. The vow is not whole. The anchor must learn its weight. The flames extinguished all at once. Darkness fell. When light returned, Kyle was on his knees, gasping. The mark on his chest burned with gold fire, searing through the fabric of his tunic. Erwin knelt beside him, her hands trembling. Kyle. He grabbed her wrist, eyes wild. It's showing me things. What things? Ruins. A temple buried beneath ice. The god's first vow sealed there. He looked up, his voice breaking. It's calling for us. Celine exhaled shakily. Then the gods aren't done with you. Erwin's eyes met Kyle's, and in them burned both fear and fierce devotion. Then we go where it calls. Later that night, when the others slept, Kyle and Erwin stood together on the balcony overlooking the valley. The moon was full, silver as memory. Snow drifted softly through the air. Kyle's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. The simplest gesture, yet it felt like defiance against the whole of creation. I don't know how long I can hold this, he said quietly. This power. It's not meant for mortal bones. Then we'll learn, she said. We'll shape it into something that belongs to us. He turned to her, voice low. You still believe that? Her gaze didn't waver. I have to, because if I stop believing... We both vanish. They stood in silence for a long time, two figures in the cold, bound by love and doom, watching the stars burn out one by one. Far below, unseen, the ice over the ancient lake began to crack. Something vast stirred beneath it, slow, awakening, patient. The vow had been reclaimed. But in the deep, another vow was waiting. Chapter 7. The Burden of the Alpha-King. The first light of dawn bled across the snow in pale ribbons, soft as silk. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed afraid to speak. Kyle stood at the edge of the frozen lake, watching the faint reflection of his breath on the ice. His reflection shimmered, not quite his own. The faint golden runes of the gods still glowed along his throat, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Each pulse felt heavier than the last. Behind him, Erwin approached slowly. Her steps were light, but he felt her presence like warmth brushing against his spine. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first. His voice, when it came, was rough. "It's strange. I can hear them sometimes, whispers, as if the world is listening through me." Her hand hesitated, then found his arm. "It is listening. You are its anchor now." He turned to her, those wolf-silver eyes searching hers for something she couldn't name. "And what are you now, Erwin?" She smiled faintly, though sorrow rimmed the edges. "The reason you can't be free." They walked back to the keep in silence. Winterthorn Castle stood beneath the pale sun, its towers crowned with frost. Smoke curled gently from the great hall chimneys, carrying the scent of pine and roasted grain. To any passer-by, it might have looked peaceful, but the air within its walls had changed. The servants whispered when Kyle passed, the soldiers bowed lower than before. They called him the chosen king, but Kyle heard another name in their voices, the cursed one. That evening the hall was full of uneasy quiet. Alaric stood near the hearth, his armor half unbuckled, his expression tight. "They're afraid of you," he said bluntly. "Even I don't know what you are anymore." Kyle gave a bitter laugh. "Neither do I." Celine entered from the shadows, her eyes dark as ink. "You carry divine weight, Kyle. You can't pretend it's gone. The god's mark is alive, look." She lifted his hand, tracing the faint shimmer beneath the skin. The light flickered in answer, like a pulse beneath a bruise. Erwin, seated by the window, flinched but said nothing. Celine's gaze darted between them. "What did you give them, Erwin?" "There's always a price." Erwin's voice trembled like a confession. His soul, the hall fell silent. Alaric's hand dropped from his sword. "You... what?" Kyle turned toward her, voice low but sharp. "Erwin," she met his gaze, eyes wet. "It was the only way to save you, to save us, by damning me." "I didn't damn you," she cried. "I bound you to life. As long as you breathe, the world stands. I couldn't lose you again, Kyle. Not after." Her voice cracked. The words died in the space between them. The fire snapped. The shadows grew long. Kyle's expression softened, pain warring with love in his eyes. "Erwin, you think I wanted to be saved at that cost?" Her voice fell to a whisper. "I couldn't watch you die again." He moved toward her, slow, deliberate, until the air between them shimmered with heat and sorrow. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. "Then we both live with it," he murmured. "Every breath, every night, every dawn, until the gods themselves envy what we endure." Outside, the wind began to rise. Snow swept across the courtyard like restless ghosts. From the northern cliffs, a faint howl echoed, not of wolves, but something older, something listening. Erwin looked up sharply. "Do you hear that?" Kyle did. The whisper within him pulsed stronger now, ancient, commanding, like a heartbeat from beneath the earth. He staggered, clutching his chest. "They're calling—" Alaric stepped forward. "The gods?" Kyle shook his head slowly. "No, something beneath them, something else." The torches in the hall flickered blue. The air grew heavy, pressing down on their lungs. And then a voice, neither male nor female, filled the room like the wind itself speaking. "The balance wavers. The vow is not whole. The anchor must learn its weight." The flames extinguished all at once. Darkness fell. When light returned, Kyle was on his knees, gasping. The mark on his chest burned with gold fire, searing through the fabric of his tunic. Erwin knelt beside him, her hands trembling. "Kyle," he grabbed her wrist, eyes wild. "It's showing me things." "What things?" "Ruins, a temple buried beneath ice, the gods' first vow sealed there." He looked up, his voice breaking. "It's calling for us." Celine exhaled shakily. "Then the gods aren't done with you." Erwin's eyes met Kyle's, and in them burned both fear and fierce devotion. "Then we go where it calls." Later that night, when the others slept, Kyle and Erwin stood together on the balcony overlooking the valley. The moon was full, silver as memory. Snow drifted softly through the air. Kyle's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. The simplest gesture, yet it felt like defiance against the whole of creation. "I don't know how long I can hold this," he said quietly. "This power. It's not meant for mortal bones." "Then we'll learn," she said. "We'll shape it into something that belongs to us." He turned to her, voice low. "You still believe that?" Her gaze didn't waver. "I have to, because if I stop believing—" We both vanish. They stood in silence for a long time, two figures in the cold, bound by love and doom, watching the stars burn out one by one. Far below, unseen, the ice over the ancient lake began to crack. Something vast stirred beneath it, slow, awakening, patient. The vow had been reclaimed. But in the deep, another vow was waiting. End of Chapter 7. Would you like me to begin Chapter 8, The Temple Beneath the Ice, where Kyle and Erwin journey north to uncover the gods' first vow, and encounter new characters, ancient lore, and a revelation that will tear at the heart of their love? It will be both romantic and haunting, like an ancient legend being lived in real time. You said, "Yes," ChatGPT said, "Perfect. Then let us descend together into the ancient north. The ice remembers what the living forget." This is Chapter 8, The Temple Beneath the Ice, a chapter where myth becomes memory, and memory becomes the most dangerous truth. It's a story of travel, faith, and love stretched between worlds. And beneath it all, the aching tenderness of two souls learning that devotion can both save and undo them. Chapter 8. The Temple Beneath the Ice. They left Winterthorn before dawn. The castle lay behind them like a shadow fading into the storm. The northern path was a graveyard of frost, white plains, skeletal trees, and the distant gleam of mountains that pierced the clouds like forgotten gods. Kyle rode ahead on a black stallion, its breath rising in pale clouds. Eowyn followed close behind, wrapped in a fur cloak the color of ash. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying whispers from the deep snow. "Do you hear them?" she asked quietly. Kyle's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Always. They traveled for 3 days, and with each mile the world grew older. The air thickened with the scent of salt and stone. The sun rarely broke through the veil of storm, and when it did, it cast the landscape in a dim, almost dreamlike silver. Villages vanished behind them, small, silent places where people crossed themselves when Kyle passed. At night, they camped near ruined shrines, pillars half swallowed by ice, etched with runes that pulsed faintly when Kyle drew near. Eowyn would wake sometimes to find him standing barefoot in the snow, his breath fogging the air, eyes distant, as if listening to voices too ancient to name. On the 4th night, the wind carried a cry. Not human, not wolf, but something that made the horses tremble and the flames shudder in their lanterns. Eowyn rose from her blanket, heart hammering. Kyle was already awake, sword drawn, gaze fixed toward the black ridge beyond the campfire. From the darkness emerged a figure, small, cloaked, walking as if through water. When it drew closer, Eowyn saw that it was a woman, old, her skin mapped with centuries, her eyes pale blue as glacier light. Around her neck hung a charm of wolf bone and sapphire. "You've come," she said, voice thin but steady. "The gods said you would." Kyle lowered his blade slightly. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, slow and knowing. "I was the keeper of the first vow. When the world was still young enough to bleed." Eowyn's pulse quickened. "The temple, does it exist?" The old woman's gaze lingered on Kyle. "Oh, it exists, beneath the ice where even time refuses to look. But beware, Alpha King, what sleeps there remembers her." Kyle frowned. "Her?" The woman turned her blind eyes toward Eowyn. "The first maiden, the one who bound her soul to a wolf and called it love." They followed the woman across the ice fields until dawn broke faintly in the east. The wind was sharp enough to draw tears, the sky bruised violet and gold. At last, the frozen plain split into a deep gorge, and below it, shimmering beneath layers of ancient ice, they saw it. The temple. It was vast, columns of translucent crystal carved in the likeness of wolves and moons. A single stairway descended from the cliffs, its steps worn smooth by time. Even from above, Eowyn could feel it, the hum beneath her feet, like a pulse in the bones of the world. Kyle's voice was hushed. "This is it!" The old woman nodded once. "The gods left their first promise here, a vow of union between spirit and flesh, but every vow has its shadow." Her hand brushed Eowyn's arm. "Do not let the ice remember you." They descended in silence. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted their presence. Frost gathered on Kyle's lashes. Eowyn's heart thudded painfully, her breath coming in pale ghosts. When they reached the bottom, the air grew warmer, not from fire but from something living beneath the ice. The walls shimmered faintly with veins of blue light, like veins of a giant sleeping beneath glass. In the center stood an altar of pure obsidian. On it, 2 intertwined figures carved from silver, a woman and a wolf, their forms almost indistinguishable. Eowyn reached out to touch it, and the world cracked open. She was standing in another time. The air was filled with chanting. Torches blazed against the ice walls. A woman in white robes stood before the same altar, her face eerily familiar. Eyes like Eowyn's, lips trembling as she whispered an oath. "I bind my soul to the wolf, that his breath may outlive mine. Let my love hold him when the gods forget. The wolf before her, massive, silver-eyed, bowed his head. When the vow sealed, the world trembled, the ice bled light, and then the woman screamed, beautifully, heartbreakingly, as her body fell and the wolf howled over her. A voice whispered in Erwen's ear, "The vow never died, it only waited." She gasped and stumbled back into the present. Kyle caught her before she hit the ground. "Erwen! What did you see?" Her lips trembled. "Us," he froze. "What?" "The first vow, it wasn't between gods and mortals. It was between two lovers, a woman who gave her life to bind her wolf to eternity. The same vow that we've been forced to repeat." Kyle's jaw clenched. "Then this curse began with love," Erwen nodded, tears shining. "And it will only end with it." The temple began to shake. The ice above them fractured like glass. A roar, ancient, deep, and full of sorrow, echoed through the chamber. The carvings on the walls began to move, light spilling from their mouths like liquid moonfire. The old woman's voice rang out, fierce and trembling. "The vow awakens! The first lovers return!" Kyle seized Erwen's hand. "We have to leave now," but Erwen's gaze was fixed on the altar. "If we run, it will start again. Every lifetime, every bond, every death." She turned to him, eyes blazing with devotion and defiance. "We end it here, together." Kyle looked at her for a long, breathless moment, and then nodded. The world began to crumble. The old woman raised her arms. "Then make the vow whole, Alpha King. Not with power, with truth." Kyle drew Erwen close, his forehead pressed to hers, his voice breaking. "I was never meant to live without you, and I was never meant to die for you," she whispered. "But here we are." They kissed, slowly, fiercely, as the temple's walls burst into silver fire. For a heartbeat there was no curse, no gods, no world. Only warmth, only them. And then the ice shattered. When the storm cleared, the gorge was silent again. The temple was gone. Only two figures remained, lying together in the snow, fingers intertwined, the light fading slowly from their bodies. Far away, a howl broke through the dawn, lonely, eternal, and filled with peace. Chapter 9. When the gods wept. The storm had passed, but nothing felt still. All across the northern lands, rivers ran silver for 7 nights, and the sky glowed with the pale fire of broken vows. Villagers said the moon refused to fade, that its tears fell as snowflakes shaped like feathers. They called it the mourning of the gods. In Winterthorn Keep, Alaric stood upon the battlements, his cloak heavy with frost, watching the auroras writhe above the mountains. His knuckles were white around the railing. Every dawn he expected to see them, Kyle and Erwen, riding back from the frozen gorge. But the road stayed empty. Behind him, Selene approached quietly. Her once dark eyes had changed since the temple fell. A faint shimmer of gold rimmed her irises, as if the gods had left fingerprints there. "They're gone," she said softly. Alaric's throat tightened. "Not gone, not gone. You saw what that place was. Nothing that powerful dies without leaving a mark." Selene's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the sky met the ruins of ice. Then perhaps that's why the wind still carries their names. Inside the hall, the hearth burned low. A child's cry rose from a cradle by the fire. The babe was small, no larger than a wolf cub, wrapped in pale linen embroidered with a sigil no one recognized, a moon entwined with a wolf's paw. Mira, the midwife, looked up when Alaric entered. "She came to us in the storm," she whispered. "No mother, no blood trail, just the light, and then her, lying there on the threshold." Selene knelt beside the cradle. The child opened her eyes, grey as dawn, ancient as sorrow. The room seemed to hush. "She's theirs," Selene murmured. "Their vow reborn." Alaric's hand trembled as he touched the baby's tiny fingers. "What should we call her?" Selene hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Eira. After the one who walked into the storm and never returned." The baby cooed softly, and for an instant the air shimmered, the faint scent of pine and snow and something wilder. Alaric stepped back, heart pounding. "She's not ordinary." "No," Selene said, her voice full of wonder. "She's the bridge the gods couldn't build." That night, as Winterthorn slept, Selene dreamt of the ice fields. She saw Kael and Erwin standing together in a vast white expanse, hand in hand, their faces turned toward the rising sun. Kael's silver eyes met hers, calm, resolute. "Guard her," he said. "Who?" "Our story." Selene woke with tears on her face, and the faint echo of wolves howling somewhere beyond the valley. When she looked toward the cradle, the child was watching her, awake, silent, and smiling as if she knew. In the weeks that followed, the world changed. The snows melted early, crops flourished where frost once ruled, the people of the north began to speak of mercy again, of unity, of a king who would one day return when the world forgot how to love. Songs spread through the villages, songs of the Wolf King and his human bride. They said he had defied death for her. They said she had rewritten the gods' laws for him. They said their love was so pure that even the stars knelt to listen. But in the keep's library, Selene wrote a different truth in her own hand. They were not gods. They were simply two souls who refused to let love end where death began. Years later, when Eira was old enough to walk, she would often wander to the edge of the forest. There, she'd kneel among the wildflowers and speak softly to the air, as though someone invisible waited to hear her stories. And sometimes, just sometimes, two sets of footprints would appear beside hers in the snow. Chapter 10. The Child of the Vow. The years had been gentle on Winterthorn. The vines had crept back over its grey walls, wild roses spilling through the cracks like soft rebellion. The banners still hung in the great hall, though their colours had faded, silver, white, and the deep blue of the north. But inside those walls, where torches whispered and the scent of parchment filled the air, one life had grown in silence, hers. Eira Thorn, daughter of no mother, heir of no father, a child the gods left on a doorstep of stone. She was 17 now. Her hair, pale as frost, reached her waist. Her eyes, those strange, storm-grey eyes, seemed to see the world twice over, once as it was and once as it might have been. People bowed when she passed, not out of loyalty but superstition. Some called her the moon's daughter, others the wolf reborn. Only Alaric, grizzled and scarred from decades of battles long past, still called her by her true name. And only Selene still brushed the snow from her cloak as though she were flesh, not prophecy. That morning, the air smelled of wet leaves and distant rain. Eira sat beneath the old birch in the inner courtyard, sketching by the pond. Her hands were stained with charcoal, her dress too simple for nobility. The reflection of her own face in the water stared back, part girl, part ghost. Behind her, footsteps approached. "You'll ruin your sleeves again," came a voice, warm, steady, touched with humour. She didn't turn. "Then I suppose my sleeves will learn what it means to live." The voice chuckled softly. It was Rowan Hale, the young historian Selene had taken on as her apprentice. He was 2 years her senior, with hair dark as pine bark and the kind of eyes that listened more than they looked. He knelt beside her, peering at the parchment. "You've drawn it again. The wolf?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. He nodded. "Always the same one." Eira's fingers stilled on the page. "Maybe because he isn't done watching me." Rowan studied her face, the way the wind stirred her hair. "Or maybe because you aren't done finding him." The silence that followed was gentle but charged, like a string drawn too tight. Eira looked up, her voice quieter. "Do you believe the stories, Rowan? That I'm theirs?" He hesitated. "I believe stories have roots, and sometimes the roots are buried so deep that we forget they ever began with something real, She smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed distant. That sounds like a way of saying yes without saying it. Rowan grinned. Perhaps. He reached over and brushed a smudge of charcoal from her cheek. His touch lingered half a heartbeat too long. Era froze, breath catching, and for a moment the air between them seemed to thrum. Then, from somewhere deep within the keep, a horn sounded. Low, mournful, old. The sound rolled through the courtyard like a memory. Era rose abruptly, clutching her sketch. That call, I've heard it before. Rowan frowned. That's the relic ward. It only sounds when something awakens, she finished. They ran through the corridors, their footsteps echoing off stone. Servants watched with wide eyes as the sound deepened, not warning but summoning. At the heart of the keep, in a small circular chamber beneath the chapel, they found Celine kneeling before an altar. Her palms were pressed to the marble floor, her body trembling. "Celine!" Era dropped to her knees beside her. "What is it?" Celine's eyes opened, glowing faintly with that same gold light from years before. "Your blood," she whispered. "It called. Something ancient in you has stirred." Era swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" Celine's gaze lifted toward the northern window, where the storm had begun to gather again, dark as ink. "It means the vow is moving through time once more." That night, Era couldn't sleep. She stood on the balcony outside her chamber, the wind biting at her hair. The moon was swollen, red at its edges. She could almost feel the world breathing, as if the air itself leaned toward her. And then she heard it, faint, almost tender, a wolf's howl, long, low, heartbreakingly familiar. Era's hands trembled on the railing. Her voice broke the night like a prayer whispered too late. "Who are you to me?" The wind answered, not with words, but with the sound of her name carried across the dark. "Era." She stepped back, heart pounding. Behind her, the door creaked. Rowan stood there, cloak in hand, concern in his eyes. "You shouldn't be out here." She turned, her voice thin. "He's real, Rowan. I can feel him." Rowan hesitated, then stepped closer, not to comfort her, but to steady himself. "Then whatever he is, he's coming closer." Their gazes held. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The fire in the brazier flickered low. The wind dropped to silence. And somewhere far beyond the mortal veil, something ancient stirred awake. Chapter 11. The Wolf Beyond the Veil. There are nights that breathe differently, nights when the air itself seems to remember what the living have forgotten. This was one of them. Era woke just before dawn. The candles in her chamber had long died out, yet the scent of smoke still lingered, faint like the ghost of warmth. She had dreamt of him again, not as the sketches she drew by day, not as shadow or myth, but as a man whose eyes were silver where light met sorrow, whose presence made the world itself tremble between fear and reverence. He hadn't spoken in the dream. He had only looked at her, and that look felt like remembering something she wasn't supposed to know. When she awoke, her pillow was damp with tears she couldn't explain. The castle stirred with morning duties. Servants whispered through the corridors, carrying bread and salted meat. Yet something about the air was wrong, too still, too thick, as though the stones themselves held their breath. Celine found her in the old library, sitting cross-legged before an open window, eyes distant. "You didn't sleep again," the priestess murmured. Era's voice was soft. He was closer this time. I could feel him breathe. Celine hesitated. "Dreams are threads, my child. Not everyone leads you home." Era looked at her, really looked. "And what if this one is home?" The priestess said nothing. The silence between them was old, carved with understanding and dread. After a long moment, Celine reached out and tucked a lock of hair behind the girl's ear. "There are doors better left unopened, Era. The vow that binds him is older than even I can read." Era smiled faintly, eyes downcast. "Then perhaps it's time someone learned to read it." That evening, The clouds came low and heavy over Winterthorn. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then endless. Rowan was in the scriptorium, copying a scroll by lantern light, when Eira appeared at his door. Her dress clung to her from the rain, her hands trembling with a strange, desperate energy. "I saw him again," she said, voice shaking. "He's trapped, Rowan. I saw the chains, the same symbols carved into the altar stone below the chapel. Only older." Rowan rose at once, heart hammering. "Eira, listen to me. You can't—" "I'm not asking permission," she interrupted. "I'm asking for your truth. You've read the old texts. Tell me what they say." He swallowed. "They speak of the Wolf King of Dareth, banished by the gods for breaking the first vow, for loving the mortal woman who saved his life." Her breath caught. "He loved her?" Rowan nodded. "And when she died saving him, he swore to return after 3 nights, no matter the cost. The gods cursed him for it. He rose, but not as man nor beast, something between—" Eira closed her eyes, trembling. "Then the vow is still alive in me. Eira," she stepped closer, rainwater dripping from her lashes. "You feel it too, don't you? Every time you look at me, you're afraid of something you can't name." Rowan exhaled shakily. "Afraid, yes, but not of you." The air between them thickened, their breath mingled, fragile, unspoken. Eira's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then what are you afraid of, Rowan?" He met her eyes, and for the first time the scholar's calm broke. "Of what I'll do if I ever stop pretending I don't already belong to you." They didn't kiss. They didn't even touch. But the silence after those words felt more intimate than any embrace, a silence that knew. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains long and low, and somewhere deep in the forest beyond the walls of Winterthorn, a wolf raised its head and howled. The sound tore through the night like a vow remembered. Eira froze, hand over her heart. "I can feel him," she whispered. "Rowan. He's waking that same night across the valley in the ruins of the ancient temple of Dareth." Moonlight poured through the cracks of broken stone and found the figure of a man half buried in ash and roots. His chest rose once, painfully, reluctantly, as though life itself fought against returning. His eyes opened, silver, wild, and full of a name he hadn't spoken in centuries. Eira. Chapter 12. When the forest remembered his name. The storm did not end that night. It stayed like a vow made of thunder, low, unbroken, and endless. At dawn the castle smelled of rain and iron. Mist hung over the courtyard, pale and restless, as though the world itself had forgotten how to breathe. Eira stood by her window, the glass fogged beneath her touch. She hadn't slept. Not since the howl. Something within her had shifted, not violently but quietly, like a lock turning after years of silence. Every shadow seemed to lean toward her. Every gust of wind carried the echo of his voice, not loud but felt. In the courtyard below, Rowan trained with the guards, his movements sharp, almost angry. Each swing of the blade was too precise, too controlled, as if he were fighting against something unseen. When Eira descended, the men stilled. She crossed the yard in silence, her white cloak dragging over the wet cobblestones. "Still chasing ghosts?" she asked softly, eyes on the blade. Rowan stopped mid-motion. His hair clung to his brow, his chest rising and falling fast. "If I am, then they're yours," she smiled faintly. "Then you've chosen the wrong weapon." They walked together through the lower gates, into the forest that surrounded Winterthorn. The rain had softened to mist now, and the world felt suspended, as if time itself held its breath. Every tree seemed older here. The bark was black with age, the roots like ancient veins crawling through the earth. Eira's fingers brushed one as she passed. It was warm beneath her touch. "Do you feel it?" she murmured. "It's alive. The forest remembers." Rowan's hand brushed his sword. Memories can be dangerous things. So can forgetting, she said, glancing back at him. Their eyes met, and something flickered between them again. Not love, not yet. Recognition, maybe, or the ache of two souls circling something neither could name. They reached the edge of the old temple ruins just as the fog began to thin. The stones were covered in moss, the carvings worn by centuries of rain. Era knelt and traced the faded runes, spirals of power faintly glowing under her fingers. Rowan's breath caught. That's impossible. Era looked up, her eyes distant. He's close. Era. But then the earth trembled, just once, deep and low. A pulse. Birds rose in a sudden flurry of wings. The trees leaned as though bowing to something unseen, and from the far side of the ruin, beneath a tangle of vines and broken stone, came the faintest sound. A heartbeat. Slow, ancient, reluctant. Era's voice broke the stillness. He's waking. Rowan moved before he could think, pulling her back, shielding her with his arm. But she didn't resist. Her gaze stayed fixed on the source of the sound, her breath shaking. I know that rhythm, she whispered. I've heard it before, in dreams. Dreams aren't real, Rowan said sharply, though his voice betrayed him. She turned to him, eyes glassy with unshed tears. Then why do you look at me as if you've dreamed them too? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It throbbed with the weight of unspoken truth. Rain began again, soft and rhythmic. Era stepped closer, close enough that Rowan could see the tremble in her lower lip, the rise and fall of her breath. I don't understand what's happening to me, she said quietly. But I know it began long before I was born. Rowan's jaw tightened. And you think he's the answer? I think he's the reason. Back in the ruins, beneath the broken altar, the heartbeat quickened. The vines twisted tighter. The runes pulsed once, twice, then flared into light. And through the crack of stone, a hand emerged, pale, scarred, trembling. The hand of a man who had once died for love. The Wolf King had returned, but not as legend told him. This was not the monstrous king the priests feared. This was something more fragile, more human. His body carried the memory of both beast and man, his heart still bound to the woman who had died for him. He breathed her name like a prayer. Era. Miles away, standing in the rain, Era went still. The world around her seemed to fold inward. She could hear it, not in her ears, but in her blood. Her knees weakened. Rowan caught her before she fell. What is it? He whispered, panic in his voice. She looked up at him, eyes wide, glowing faintly silver. He remembers me. That night, back in Winterthorn, the fires burned low. Celine stood before the altar, her expression carved with dread. The curse has turned, she murmured. The vow is fulfilling itself. One of the elders behind her spoke in a trembling voice. Does that mean the Wolf King returns? Celine closed her eyes. No. It means the story has found its way back to her. Meanwhile, in her chamber, Era stood before the mirror. The storm had passed, leaving the air too quiet. Her reflection blinked, once, twice, and for the briefest instant, another face stared back. A man's face. The same silver eyes, the same ache of memory. And in the reflection he whispered a single line that shattered the night. You died saving me. Now I live to finish what you began. Chapter 13. The Man Who Spoke Her. Name. The first night after the awakening was too quiet. No wind, no thunder, only the sound of water dripping from the castle eaves, like the slow counting of hours that refused to pass. Era didn't light her candles. She sat by the hearth, knees drawn close, watching the last embers fade to ash. She couldn't shake the echo of his voice, the one she'd heard in the mirror. Not a dream, not an illusion. It had felt real, warm, ragged, like someone who had spent lifetimes waiting to say her name aloud. You died saving me. Now I live to finish what you began. The words refused to leave her. Down the hall, Rowan couldn't sleep either. He had seen the change in her eyes, the faint silver glow beneath the surface like moonlight trapped under glass. He'd seen it, and it terrified him. He'd thought he could protect her with logic, with knowledge, with walls. But what does a scholar know of the heart of vows, of curses that wear the face of love? He paced the corridor, every torch casting two shadows, his and something else. When he reached her chamber, he stopped. A single candle burned inside now, its light flickering across her silhouette. He hesitated, hand hovering over the door, and then he heard her whisper, "Why me?" The words cracked like something breaking. Rowan closed his eyes. He couldn't knock, he couldn't leave, so he simply leaned against the door, silent, listening, as if his heart could answer for her. The next morning, mist veiled the castle grounds. The forest was so still it seemed carved from smoke. Eira walked the path toward the river, cloak wrapped tightly around her. Each breath left her mouth in a shiver of white. The air smelled of damp moss and cedar, and something else, something faintly wild like fur and frost. She stopped. Across the water stood a man, barefoot, bare-chested, the wind tangled through his dark hair, streaked faintly with silver at the temples. He did not move, did not speak. Yet she knew him instantly. The wolf, the king, the vow. Every story she'd been told, every dream she'd ever had, fell silent before that gaze. "Eira," he said softly. The way her name left his mouth felt like worship. And though there was a river between them, she could feel his warmth. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She only whispered, "You're real." He stepped forward, the water curling around his ankles, though he didn't sink. "I told you I would return." Eira's throat tightened. "That was centuries ago. For me," he said, his voice rough as stormlight. "Time stopped the moment you died." She could barely breathe. The forest around them seemed to hold its pulse. "Who was I?" she asked. He smiled faintly, heartbreakingly. "The one who saw the man inside the beast. The only one who didn't run when the gods called me cursed. And now?" she whispered. "What am I to you now?" His eyes, those impossible silver eyes, softened, the proof that vows never die. The moment broke with the sound of a branch snapping behind her. Rowan stood at the edge of the path, breath heavy, sword in hand. His expression wasn't anger, it was grief. "Eira," he said, low and strained, "get away from him." She turned slowly, torn between two worlds, one breathing, one remembered. The Wolf King's gaze didn't leave Rowan. "You carry her scent," he said quietly. "But you are not her fate." Rowan stepped forward. "And you're not her salvation." The air thickened, not with threat, but with the weight of two loves colliding, one born of history, one born of presence. Eira stood between them, trembling. "Stop! Please!" The Wolf King looked at her, and for a moment his expression changed. Sorrow, deep and human. "I have no wish to harm him," he said. "But he cannot stop what's already written." Rowan's jaw clenched. "Then I'll rewrite it." The wind surged, scattering the mist. When Eira opened her eyes again, the Wolf King was gone. Only the river remained, still, endless, quiet. She fell to her knees. Rowan dropped beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Eira, look at me!" She did, but her gaze was far away. "I knew his voice before I knew my own heartbeat," she whispered. "He's the reason I was born." Rowan's hands trembled. "Then what am I?" Eira met his eyes, and something inside her broke. Not love, but the illusion that it could be simple. "You're what makes me wish I could choose." That night, the moon was blood-red over Winterthorn. The priests gathered in the chapel, whispering prayers of protection. But Celine, alone at the altar, didn't pray. She wept, because she knew what none of them dared say aloud. The Wolf King had not returned for vengeance. He had returned for love. And love, true, ancient, unending, was always the most dangerous kind of curse. Chapter 14. The Touch of Shadows. The nights grew longer after that. The fire in the hearth burned slower. The air tasted faintly of rain and endings. Winterthorn seemed to dream, its halls full of whispers and light that never stayed still. And Era, she began to change, not suddenly but in small aching ways, the way frost slowly claims a window pane. She would wake with her pulse racing, her hands pressed to her chest as if trying to still a heartbeat that wasn't her own. When she looked into the mirror now, her reflection didn't always match her. Sometimes it watched her back. Rowan saw it too, the way her voice would soften mid-sentence, as if listening to someone only she could hear. The way her gaze drifted toward the forest, drawn by something ancient, invisible, calling. He grew quieter, his words turned brittle around the edges, his silences heavier. But he never left her side, not even when he knew, in some deep animal way, that he was slowly losing her to something he couldn't fight. One evening, the air turned gold at twilight. Era sat by the pond in the inner court, her cloak spread around her like spilled moonlight. Rowan found her there. He didn't speak at first, only stood behind her, watching the wind play with the loose strands of her hair. "I used to think love meant belonging," he said at last. "But now I think it means staying, even when you no longer do." Era looked up at him, her eyes soft, too soft. "You always speak like you're preparing to leave." He knelt in front of her. "Because I can feel the story turning, and I don't know if it has a place for me." Era reached out then, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Don't say that. You're the part that keeps me human." Rowan smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hurt. "If that's true, then promise me one thing. When he comes for you, when you finally stand before him, don't let him take that from you." She nodded, though they both knew promises meant little to destiny. That night she dreamed again. The temple, the sound of chains breaking like thunder, and the Wolf King, standing in the rain, eyes bright with sorrow and love. He reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "Why do you haunt me?" she asked. "Because I remember everything you forgot," he said. "The sound of your laughter in the old world, the way you said my name before the curse stole it from us. And if I remember," she whispered. His fingers brushed her face, the gentlest touch, the kind that makes the soul remember what it means to want. "Then the vow will be complete, and I will finally rest." Era's eyes filled. "And I'll lose you again," he smiled, the saddest, sweetest smile she'd ever seen. "You can't lose what you've always been." She woke with tears on her pillow, and Rowan asleep by her bedside, his hand still gripping hers. For a long while she just watched him. The curve of his jaw, the faint scar on his temple, the warmth of his breathing. Love wasn't fair, she thought. It never was. She leaned forward, brushing a whisper of a kiss across his knuckles. Then she rose quietly, pulling her cloak over her shoulders. The moonlight led her down the corridor, toward the forest, toward the end of the story. The ruins were alive with silver fire. The Wolf King stood there, waiting, his eyes glowing like memory itself. "I dreamed this," she said softly. "This exact place." He nodded. "You dreamed our last night. Now it's time to live it." Era stepped closer. "And after?" He looked up at the sky. "After, the curse will lift, the worlds will part, and you will be free." Her voice trembled. "And you, I will fade, the way all oaths do when they are finally kept." She shook her head, tears shining. "That's not freedom." He reached out, his hand cupping the side of her face. "It's the only kind I've ever known." And then she felt it, the warmth of his palm against her skin, the wild heartbeat beneath the calm. Not ghost, not God, man. Her hand rose to his wrist, holding him there, as if she could stop time. "I don't want to lose you again," she whispered. Not to the gods, not to the vow, not to fate, he smiled faintly, then loved me enough to let me go. The light broke through the clouds, not sunlight, but the pale silver of an ending. The runes around them pulsed once, twice, then dimmed. He leaned forward, his lips just a breath away from hers. "Thank you," he murmured, "for finding me across lifetimes." And when their foreheads touched, not quite a kiss, but something older, the light flared, swallowing them both in silence. When the dawn came, the ruins were still. The Wolf King was gone, and Era lay among the stones, her cloak glowing faintly with frost and moonlight. Rowan found her there. He fell to his knees, pulling her into his arms. Her eyes opened slowly, their glow fading to grey. "It's over," she whispered. "He's free." Rowan pressed his forehead to hers, tears sliding down his face. "And you?" She smiled weakly. "Still human, still here." Weeks passed. The forest quieted, the mist lifted. Sometimes, at dusk, when the wind caught the trees just right, Era would look up from her window and smile, certain she could still hear the echo of a howl in the distance. Not haunting, just remembering. Epilogue, where the howl meets the dawn. The world healed slowly. Spring came late that year, as if the earth itself was learning how to breathe again. The snows melted in hesitant trickles, revealing moss and the broken bones of flowers that dared to bloom too soon. And Era walked among them, like someone learning to be mortal again. Winterthorn was quieter now. The echoes had softened, the air warmer, the mirrors no longer whispered. Sometimes she would still wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, half expecting to see a figure by her bed, tall, shadow-wrapped, eyes like molten silver. But there would only be the hush of the wind, the soft ticking of the hearth's embers. Rowan would stir beside her, reach for her hand without opening his eyes. And she would stay like that, hand in his, heartbeat steady, until morning. The world remembered him differently. To the villagers, the Wolf King was only a tale now, a god of moonlight and ruin, banished by love itself. To the priests he was a warning, proof that even divinity could bleed for a mortal. But to Era he was not legend, he was memory, the scent of rain on cold stone, the way a heartbeat could sound like a vow when pressed against your skin, the echo that never really left her. She kept a journal after that, a small, leather-bound thing filled with ink stains and pressed flowers, written in a hand that trembled at the edges. Not for history, for remembrance. She wrote of the old world, of gods and wolves, of oaths that broke time, of the boy who stood by her when love demanded too much, and of the man who loved her enough to disappear. Sometimes, when she wrote too long into the night, the candle would flicker, once, twice, as if the air itself was turning the page for her. Years passed. The lines on her hands deepened, her hair turned silver. Rowan's laughter grew softer, more fragile. They moved to the valley at the edge of the woods, far from Winterthorn, where the forest still sang at dusk. There, they built a garden of moonflowers, the kind that only opened when the world went quiet. Every night, she would stand by the window watching them bloom. And every night, without fail, she would whisper, not prayer, not farewell, just a name carried into the dark, Kael. And somewhere beyond the veil of things, something ancient stirred, not in sorrow but in recognition. The last winter came gentle, snow drifted like forgotten parchment. The moon rose low and full, silvering the frost on the garden paths. Rowan had fallen asleep by the fire, his head resting on her lap. Era brushed a hand through his hair, her heart full, not with longing, but peace. She reached for her journal, opened it to the last page. The ink shimmered faintly in the candlelight. Her hand shook, but her words were clear. He walked through centuries for me, and I through sorrow for him, but love is the only thing that never fades. It only changes form, waiting for us in the quiet beyond. When the candle went out, the room filled with silver light. No sound, only the wind shifting through the trees outside, a low, familiar howl that rose and softened, then vanished into the dawn. The next morning the villagers found the door ajar, 2 chairs by the fire, a book lying open between them, and outside, among the moonflowers, 2 sets of footprints, one fading, one just beginning. Some vows end in silence, others echo forever. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, don't just leave, subscribe, and let's keep feeling something real together.